reaches prayer from anywhere, carries the promise of
Just share with you a short little video that is really important. As I've explained, this ministry has kind of grown. It started with very little, and then it's grown, and the concepts have developed more and more. One of the things that I observed as I traveled and worked with individuals is that there was a sense of inclusiveness that we wanted to develop. When we added orphans and vulnerable children, first it was orphans. Then we said, that wait a minute, there's also vulnerable children. Someone corrected me and said, what about vulnerable children? They may have their parents, but they are vulnerable to abuse or to neglect or to whatever the case. So we added orphans and vulnerable children. As we added that and we began thinking about people who have lost a spouse or people, whether they be deaf or blind or whatever the case may be, I said we really need a theme song that would help pull all of this together. Now, one song that is used, especially in Inter-America, is You Are a Possibility.
Yes.
Yeah, and we have a video for that one too. If I had my computer, we would play that one too. But I did have this one planned. This is called Not Alone. And people go through different points in their experience when they can feel alone and isolated. And that becomes a heart issue, and they need encouragement. So I found this song, and we've named it as our theme song. We're not dogmatic on it. People can use whatever they want. But organizationally, we call this our theme song. I got permission. I worked with the legal department at the General Conference and worked with the Uganda Children's Choir, made up of all orphans, who will be singing the song that you will hear. So as you hear the words, usually what I'll do is I have us sing this. We're sitting around tables and all this. We would all learn, I would pass out the words and we would sing this. I asked the lady, one of these people, I don't know if Daryl, if you know Taida, remember Taida? From Spain. And she is just a very close friend and an interpreter for the deaf. Not doing that right now, which is another story of sadness on my part. We've lost two because of finance and whatever, and they're not doing that now. And they were just, both of them, one in Brazil and one in Spain, very close friends and very talented. But before Tida left, she had done this, and I'm going to play it now. It's Not Alone by the Ugandic Children's Choir, and I have permission to use this like this if I tell you who did it. So I've done that, okay? Isn't that powerful words? Just the concept, again, is so powerful. We're not alone. We go through some tough times, but we're not alone. We have this.
Over 300 million.
No more. There are some things I can stop. So we're going to start in just a moment. And I think this one, Noe, where art thou? Okay, I think this one is the introduction to the deaf, and then you go next, okay? So our next, I will introduce this one since I'm here, and since you're going to be doing this. We're very happy for the Ministry for the Deaf, and it was the foundational ministry that got us going. And what we want to do is to encourage the deaf to realize that they have a responsibility to work outside their own circle. They need to work for the blind as well as the deaf, and the hearing as well as the deaf, and so forth. So we are not a monolithic group. We are a group that is glued. There is a natural glue that we have because we group where we are comfortable. The deaf are naturally going to group with the deaf, the blind with the blind, and so forth. I'm not opposed to that. We understand that. That works. But to stay there is not right. And we have to reach out beyond that. And that's the message of APM, Adventist Possibility Ministries. So let's go ahead and hear. I want to back up a little bit. How do I back this up? Maybe it's okay.
million people on this planet suffer with deafness or hearing loss. Although deaf people drive cars, ride bicycles, and see all the colors of the rainbow, they perceive their silent world in their own unique way. Sadly, the world tends to isolate them. It is vital you and I do not view those with deafness as needing to be fixed. They need to be accepted along with their own language and culture. As with other special needs groups, they need to be seen for who they are. Those who are deaf have a strong sense of identity. They view their deafness in a positive way. They're proud to be part of the deaf community. Being deaf is not a barrier to contributing to society, so discover their talents and involve them. Restoring dignity, personal worth, and meaning in life is at the heart of Possibility Ministries. Discover more at possibilityministries.org.
Good afternoon. So we changed the presentation a little bit, and instead of actually having a presentation, the three of us thought it would be better if we did more of a panel discussion on deaf culture and inclusion. And one of the beautiful things about being in ministry is I get to share ministry with other colleagues in ministry. To my right here is Chuck McGee, which if you were here for church, you would have enjoyed his children's story. Chuck McGee is the Deaf Ministry Coordinator down in Oregon Conference. And to my left is Boyd Garner, who is also another ministry colleague who is working in deaf ministry as well. And sitting on the floor in front of me is our North American Division Deaf Ministry Coordinator, who's going to be acting as one of our interpreters, who's also going to chime in every once in a while. She'll be voicing for Boyd over here. And the other interpreter is Daryl, who's going to be interpreting for Chuck. That's my understanding. So I'm very, very much excited about having this discussion. And with that, I'm going to open and give the floor over to Chuck and Boyd.
Well, thank you, Noe. I'd like to let you know that I'm also an elder for the Tabernacle Adventist Church in Portland, in Oregon. So I've been given more opportunities to work with regular members, not just those that are in the deaf, our deaf congregation. They've invited me to become an elder for the overall church. Well, how did I become Adventist? Well, I was looking for the true church. A church that helped me to feel like I belonged not only to God, of course that's the supreme reason, but I needed fellowship. And so I had moved to Beaverton, Oregon. I used to attend a Sunday keeping church. There was an interpreter there, and it was wonderful. I enjoyed going to church there. There were some deaf people that were attending as well, regular attendees. And so and I noticed, I think it was only a few miles away, there was in Beaverton, there was a Beaverton church. Chuck's name was attached to it. So I emailed Chuck, and I said, Chuck, I'm interested in visiting your church. But you go to church on, what is it, Saturday? What's that? Oh, yes, come on, you're welcome. We'll tell you more about it in person. So we met in person, and I learned so much from him. And as he shared with me in sign language and from the Bible, he convinced me, and I was baptized in 2007. It was only 6 months after he first convinced me, and I joined the church because of the truth. And so here I am today. Let's see, oh wow, it's been, 14 years? 15, 16? Wow, time flies. So Chuck.
So hello, my name is Chuck McGehee. And he's my right arm man to help me ever since he's joined every year. And he's an elder now, and this is good. I've been an Adventist since the 70s. And maybe a mystery. Yeah, my conversion was a mystery. I was learning about all these things, 666 and et cetera, and I was fascinated with that. And my friend was very faithful, very humble Adventist, and he encouraged me to look to Jesus. And my wife agreed, okay, so we accepted that path. And in fact, it was the wrong way. It was a focus on prophecy in the 666. And so anyway, I came to know Jesus well, and I got a lot of support. There was a lot of possibilities and different levels. And so there were different leaders. There were hearing people also, interpreters in the past, that I could see the possibilities. And so now I'm here, and hello.
So now that we have heard a little bit of their story, Chuck or Boyd, can you share with us a little bit more about how your culture differs from that of the hearing culture? Because we know, as we've learned so far, that the deaf have their own culture, but can you share with us a little bit more of what that looks like?
The difference between hearing and deaf is, the one thing is hearing. And so I've seen many different foreign languages, and they get along fine. The deaf have this, because they can't hear, it's very, it depends on vision. And so I grew up in an oral school, and they were real strict. If you used your hands, you got punished. It was forbidden to use sign language. And so you practiced lip reading and speaking. And so at break time for recess, we would use our own, gesturing. It was we just communicated naturally that way. And it was no American Sign Language, and so that's how I learned. And then I found out at the deaf school used sign language, and that became more comfortable, and that's why I encourage so that we understand the difference between hearing and deaf, and combine our resources with more possibilities.
Well, what he said is, our hearing is really based on our eyes. We hear with our eyes. I wasn't born to a deaf family or anything. I was actually born hearing. I could hear when I was born. I lost my hearing when I was 4 because I had meningitis. Lost my hearing at that point. I had issues with my balance, and I grew up with that. I honestly don't remember being able to speak. My first memory goes back to, I had already not been able to hear. It's kind of funny. I don't remember ever hearing. But working, there is a connection with people that can sign, because you can communicate so easily. We talk about, we don't need to be fixed. The video mentioned that deafness is not something you need to fix. And as I grew up, my parents were already divorced, but I felt, when I got meningitis, my dad was a busy man. He was on a military base. And, that's how I actually got meningitis, is because I was exposed to meningitis. And so they wanted me to get a cochlear implant, and it didn't work. I was so profoundly deaf. And I felt like I was less of a person, that I had to be fixed. And so I went to a special class. It was a regular public school, and I found that there were other people like me, and that made me feel better. That's what I needed. I didn't need to be fixed. I was fine. I needed communication access. That's what I needed. Communication is the key. That's what's important. I didn't mind, if you can't communicate well, if you can't sign well, if you have to use voice to text or something, that's fine, as long as we communicate. Amen, Chuck is saying.
Can you give us some ideas? Sorry, I was waiting for my interpreter to catch up there. Can you give us some ideas of how we hearing people possibly, maybe give us some ideas of what it looks like. Hearing people when we talk to each other, we'll say like, hey, or we'll yell across the room. What does that look like for a deaf person getting each other's attention? Because, I'm not really sure what that looks like.
We throw things. No, I'm kidding. No, we wave. Or we walk up to and get their attention that way.
Really, during break, I visit church members, and we're invisible, okay? Because you don't know anything. You're not saying you're deaf if you're not signing. As soon as you sign, then they know it. And so I get all kinds of responses, can you read lips, etc. Some upset you a little bit, but I said, well, we can sit down and write back and forth. After that, there's a welcome. And so I've seen isolated deaf people in different churches, and so I imagine how they make that contact and be involved. But you can make that decision to try to get involved in how you can help and assist the communication. Instead of acting like a deer in the headlights, but you can try to smile. There's big, that's the big story, smile.
Yeah, so we need, like all of you, you want to bring a deaf person to church. Well, what if I was the only deaf person from the outside? Say I'm out on the streets. You don't know who's deaf out on the streets. Now, if Chuck and I were out on the streets and we start signing, you'll say, oh, you're deaf. Oh, okay. Well, I'm deaf too. It's just, you don't look deaf unless you're signing. So if you're out there in the streets and the only way you're going to recognize that someone is deaf is if they're trying to order a Big Mac hamburger at McDonald's or something. You can notice that they're deaf, and you can say, "Hi, I know a little signing." Introduce yourself, and just say hello. You can say, "Oh, I go to so-and-so church," or you can make friends that way, rather than trying to go out in the streets and try to find a deaf person. Like you said, we're invisible. We don't sign to ourselves. Or if you were to go out there and just start signing, hoping that you come across a deaf person on the street, that won't work either, because there may not be anybody on the street that day. But did you have something that you wanted to? Oh, Tim. There are many, many people that are hearing. There are 355 million Americans, and only 26 have hearing loss, and so it's not that many. When you look at the numbers, it's just really hard to find because it's a small population.
So talking a little bit about inclusion. Oh, wait, just a second.
It's the interpreter clarifying something. He said 2.6 million, not 26 million.
So talking a little bit about inclusion. So if you have a deaf person show up to your church, you have no interpreter, yourself have no knowledge of sign language at all. As Chuck was just saying a moment ago about the deer in the headlight look, how would you avoid that moment? A deaf person comes to your church, you're the person greeting at the door, you don't have any way to communicate with them, but there is something that you can do. So I want you to look at your neighbor sitting next to you in the chair right now, and I want you to give them a big smile. Can you guys practice that? Big smile on your face. So guess what? You guys just spoke a universal language. Smile can be reached across any language. You have a deaf person that comes to your church, you smile, and you welcome them in, and then you're able to talk to them further from that. Riding back and forth with them, as Boyd, I think it was Boyd that just mentioned about riding with a person, you're able to do that. And I do see a hand. Can you hold off to the end, because we will have a question and answer session. So there are things that we can do as hearing people, even if we don't know sign language. And don't think that, just because I don't know sign language, there is no way I can't even talk to a deaf person. No, you can. And guess what? They don't bite. So, and I wanted to also ask here, Chuck and Boyd, I noticed that you guys are using a lot of facial expressions and a lot of body movement in your language. So can you kind of tell me how English and ASL are different?
Boyd is an ASL teacher, so let's let him address that.
Well, there is no perfect translation from sign language or American Sign Language to English. First, you have to understand the concept. Like in English word, run, you have to use it in a sentence to know what it means. How do you sign the word run? What's the context? Like, I can't tell you the sign for run. Are we jogging? Is your nose running? Is the water running? It's very complicated. I'm trying to think. Wow, English is actually very complicated, and people might say American Sign Language is complicated. I'm like, okay, that's fine, but really, you go with what you know. There's one student that I had when I was volunteering to teach sign language at the center. he's like, whoa, you guys signed so fast, I can't keep up. I got to leave class. I said, oh, no, you learn at your own pace. If it's slow, that's fine. We'll just keep progressing. And he was relieved. And I said, if you want to learn one sign a day, that's fine. No problem. But the important thing is that you learn. And if you can't, well, there's some other way to communicate. That's why I was so impressed when I went into a place that says, oh, I know a little sign. I know the alphabet. Oh, you're deaf. Okay. Here, let me write a note. Just the effort of trying to communicate it touches my heart. It leaves a good impression. Example, I go to Starbucks, and when they have that attitude of good service and trying to meet my communication needs, I go back. It's the same thing with church. You meet a deaf person's needs, you welcome them, make them feel like they're part of the family, they'll want to go back. Went to a church in Vancouver. I went in the door. I just visited one Sabbath. Just randomly went to visit. I said, hi, I'm deaf. You can use my phone, voice to text or something. I'm just here to visit. I was just looking to see if there might be space here that we could meet as a deaf group. And the woman says, oh, can you wait just a moment? And she took off, found someone that knew a little sign language, and came back. And this person said, hi, I know a little signing. I used to be an interpreter a long time ago. Well, that's cool. And so I explained why I was there. And I was just asking if there was a space that we could meet as a deaf group. And the people were so friendly. Now, they didn't all know sign language, but I felt that, well, some knew the sign happy and then Sabbath. It's a start. And you start somewhere. It's the attitude and the effort to make communication happen.
I agree with Boyd, yes, definitely.
I wanted to also add to what Boyd was just mentioning a moment ago, that the attempt from our behalf as a hearing person to communicate with a deaf person, writing back and forth, and guess what? You are also capable of using your body and using body language. We can gesture, we can try to make things communicate between the two of us. Boyd, if you noticed, yeah, see, he's saying motioning like going and eating. So if you've noticed that Boyd had said that the attempt to communicate, the wanting to try, he didn't say anything about, oh, you are perfect in your sign language. No, you're not fluent. I have no time for you. That's not what he said. He said that the attitude makes a difference. When we have the attitude of wanting to communicate, of wanting to try with our new deaf friends, that goes a long ways. And then you can pick up signs along the way. So I wanted to also mention church. I had a deaf person that was baptized in a church, and the pastor invited me to come and to meet this deaf woman. And you realize in that church, there was no interpreter in that church. It was just one deaf lady. This hearing church had taken this deaf woman under her wing. They loved on her. They involved her in everything in that church. In fact, when I showed up to interpret, she didn't really want me there. She didn't feel like she had a need for the interpreter. And the hearing friends, she wanted her hearing friends because they were all very connected with her, meeting her needs, making sure she was doing okay, communicating with her the best that they could. And if you noticed, I will again state, there was no interpreter in that church. And the hearing people didn't know sign language, but they loved her anyway. And she responded to that love by staying in that church. We can include deaf if we're loving to them and we're trying to include them. And like we saw today, Chuck gave a children's story. Our deaf friends can be very much a part of our church services. Boyd mentioned that he's an elder. I know deaf individuals in other churches that are deacons, or in one case in a church in Arkansas, the deaf individual that's in the church is the bulletin secretary. And that hearing church has a hard time functioning without her. In fact, I think the story goes that she wanted to quit at one point, and they begged her to come back because she wanted to be part of that. So it's important to include the deaf in our church services. We can include them too. They're very much a part of it. Chuck or Boyd, do you have anything to add? Okay. So.
I've got a little something to say. I've been seeing this happen quite often too. It's happened to me too. Suppose I have a deaf person and I'm riding back and forth to them. And I hear something and I leave. I feel excluded there. Wait until that conversation is finished and then the hearing take dominance over the attention, and the deaf person often feels left out. So that's my concern.
It's like, so a person is talking with a deaf person, like say I'm hearing and I'm talking with a deaf person. Don't let someone just walk in and start talking to you. Wait, you're in a conversation. You need to finish that conversation. But sometimes someone was like, oh, I'm just going to whisper something in your ear, and then that's all. But that's still interrupting. Manners is very important.
And that is hard as a hearing person. I have a very difficult time with that. And it took me a long time to train myself that if I'm having a conversation with my deaf friend, if I have a hearing person that walks up, then I need to finish what I'm doing with my conversation with my deaf friend first before I transition to the hearing person. We tend to lean on our hearing more because we're hearing, right? That's our first thing. But trying to transition to that can be difficult. So, and I completely understand what you're talking about. I wanted to transition a little bit and to discuss, we talked about recently including a deaf person in your church. If you have one deaf person that comes, and going from that to now, like in Chuck and Boyd's situation at their church, they have many deaf members that attend their church. They have a whole deaf church, so it looks a little bit different. So I wanted to discuss that a little bit. And the reason why is because, as hearing people, we see them off in their own. For example, I'm gonna use the potluck today as an example. The deaf people were at the end of the table having their own conversation, and the hearing people were having their conversation. And I'm just as guilty. I'm not picking on anyone, I'm picking on myself. But what does that look like when we have deaf church and a hearing church, but we want to include them and we don't want to be separate, and we want to also respect the deaf, because understand that the deaf needs are very different than ours. They have a visual language, and like any other language group, individuals, they need to have their own church services. So this is why I'd like to have Chuck and Boyd speak a little bit more on what that looks like at their church.
Okay, I'll respond. I have experience with this happening. And so the deaf feel natural, they communicate with sign. That's fine. And then hearing, they communicate verbally, okay, that's great. But now when they're together, okay, you can try. It's possible you can learn to fellowship together. And so in the future, they will want to meet with somebody that understands their language. The deaf will gravitate towards someone who understands their own language.
So a while ago, let's see, we were talking about agape feast. Yeah. So it's a supper, the Lord's Supper, where we share and we do our foot washing. We have tables set up. We don't have a lot that show, but we have, our bread, and we have different soups and different light food items. So you know what we do? Deaf people will grab a table. And the people that aren't deaf will grab chairs around the deaf. It doesn't mean that we're like, oh, well, you can hear, we don't. But if you sign, we want you to sit with us. For example, at Potluck, Esther sat with us. She's hearing. Well, maybe half deaf, I don't know. But her parents are deaf, and she joined us, and she was welcome to join us. She signs. We can communicate easily and naturally. We're not exclusive. But if you're comfortable, come on, sit with us. You say, hey, I want to be involved and get to know you more. And you're welcome, even if you don't know how to sign a sentence. You don't have to. It's just the attitude, a willingness to communicate. Just join us. We need to try not to be separate, segregated by language, but it is a natural inclination.
I'd like to add to that. Don't feel bad, if you're separated, but some deaf people they enjoy sitting down and writing with hearing people. I've seen that. And one of them is Harold. He loves sitting down, and all day he's full of news, and if it happens that you're separate, don't feel bad, but yeah.
I wanted to also add to this discussion about Sabbath school time, because during Sabbath school, the traditional hearing Sabbath school is we have discussion time, where people chime in their ideas or they lend to the discussion of the topic. Deaf people want to be involved. They want to be able to discuss. But what ends up happening, if you haven't noticed during this interpreting process, even now, there's a little bit of what we call lag time. So it might be a little bit behind, or however that looks like, so you're not quite getting the response right away. Can you imagine taking that and putting that into Sabbath school discussion, where this discussion is going rapid fire? So that means that by the time our deaf friend catches up to that point where they want to, hey, I want to comment on that one topic. Well, we're already 3 topics beyond that. We're not there anymore. So this is similar to a deaf person sitting here watching television, where they can't really chime in to contribute to the discussion, but they very much want to be part of it. So the solution to the problem is, if you have deaf in your congregation, they have their own Sabbath school. This alleviates the problem of only being a passive person, but being more of an active person. Now they can discuss in their language, they can be more pictures if they need to, they can do whatever they need to be able to have their own discussion, to gain just as much of a blessing from the message as us hearing people do. So it's not an idea of them being separate, but it's an idea of meeting their language needs. So if we have anything else?
Boy, let me explain just real quick.
Go ahead.
So you might have noticed, this is the interpreter Esther speaking, you might have noticed Boyd was signing, and now Chuck is signing. But they're not speaking to you, they are repeating what I'm saying. Because we have deaf people in the audience. Tim's in the audience. He can't read their backs. They can't see through their backs, and so they need to repeat what's being said so Tim can see. All right, so who's talking?
So interpreter speaking here, us professionals and our deaf people, we forgot about deaf people sitting behind us. And we just suddenly, we're leaving someone out. So, apologies.
That is okay.
We love you.
Go ahead.
So Noe, maybe I could say something a little bit about our culture. Like you were talking about calling and yelling, how getting someone's attention. So Should we talk about that? So Chuck, you want to talk about your situation that you mentioned? You have 2 minutes. Are you serious? Okay.
I've noticed there's a tradition, in the hall you'll see deaf people signing, and someone has to walk through. You don't have to say, I'm sorry, just go right on through. Go through. It's not going to insult us. Just saying hi and I love you for it.
Okay, so just walk through. If you see 2 deaf people that are talking and signing, just walk through it. Don't even sweat it. You don't have to say, excuse me. Then you're a distraction. Then you derail our train of thought. If you don't even remember what we were talking about, just pass through. You might say, excuse me, as you're passing through quickly, but if you want a person's attention, like across the room, you don't have to throw anything. I did mention that earlier. Please don't throw anything. But you can wave. If you don't get their attention, you can walk over. We have legs. You can walk up and touch them on the shoulder and gently. Don't pound on them. Now, if you're in a room full of deaf people and you need everyone's attention, flick the light switch on and off. You can't yell at them, so you just have to flick the light switch on and off. And that's a basic way of getting their attention. As you get involved in deaf ministry or the blind have their own methods of getting each other's attention. The more you spend time with a group of people, the more you learn about how they live. It's not the way you live, maybe, but and by the way, deaf people might make a lot of noise. Like we might stamp the floor because a vibration is felt and try to get their attention. It doesn't mean we're trying to be a nuisance to other people, but we're just actually trying to get their attention by maybe tapping a foot on the floor or something. Those are things that you'll learn as you move along.
Sometimes deaf are very quiet. They might be looking at a book very quietly, chilling out, and sometimes they could get spooked if you, kind of surprise them. And just like I see hearing people too. So you can put your hand close so that they realize, oh, you're trying to get their attention.
Yeah. So you can gently tap them or something. Yeah, don't scare them. Or our interpreter's demonstrating.
So I see that Larry has something over here.
Yeah, I have questions too.
Yes, we're going to open up right now.
You're going to just let the hearing have questions.
Yes, I was waiting for them to finish and then I was going to open it up for them. Yes. No, I'm glad you reminded me. Thank you. All right, so as Larry just reminded me, the last part of our presentation right now, we're going to open it up for you guys' questions. If you have questions that you would like to ask any of us, please feel free. And I know we did have a hand earlier, so go ahead. How great is the what? Texting.
Well, technology has greatly improved over the years. At Weimar, I was a student there for a brief time. There was an interpreter. I wanted to go to church. I didn't want to stay in my room. I wanted to go to church on Sabbath. I had my laptop, and it had, I'm getting facial expressions from Daryl. It's not perfect, but there was voice to text. It wasn't perfect, no, but it was good enough. You can use texting at work. I have co-workers that in Vancouver, we communicate by using texting. Some can sign. There's one guy who knows how to sign. He used to be a teacher for American Sign Language, but had forgotten over the years. And so it's coming back to him. So that's cool. But one tip, don't become dependent on one mode of communication. Oh, texting works. Well, that's all we're going to use. No. the old method was to write, and it's actually still the best.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that, because you brought it up. Some of you have, you speak into your phone and it will print out what you're saying, for communicating with other languages, and that. So yeah, voice to text is good. So it's a wonderful technology, and I really like it.
I use that a lot at work, at Amazon. Yeah, voice to text, that's what we use a lot. Mhm.
I have a question. So you have the deaf and the hearing in the same church, meeting in different places. Does that mean there's no connection between the two? Are you just isolating? Are you just coming to our hearing church so you can be separate from us? Or is there a way that the deaf and the hearing can come together?
Mm-hmm.
Can socialize, get to know each other, understand their families, and like at dinners, potlucks, board meetings, different events, committee meetings. You can put an interpreter there. There can be some great chances to socialize there. Yeah.
To follow up on that, Boyd said he was a member of a church. Is that just an elder for the deaf, or does he also serve the hearing?
I'm a regular, well, you could say for all the church, hearing and deaf. We don't really exactly have a deaf group because people moved off, or I've become an elder, for the whole church, and I attend church board meetings. We have an interpreter there. I'm involved in the discussion. Also the activities of the church as an elder. Tim had his hand up.
I don't want the group to get the impression, and maybe they don't have that impression, but I want to make sure we don't leave the impression that you are separatists, that you are actually working with us, because one of the things we've been talking about.
Boyd saying you're right.
Pardon?
He said you're right.
Okay, so what we have here is an important point, in my opinion. We talked about how in Romans we saw 4 important principles. And that is, not only do the hearing recognize that the deaf are part of the body, but the deaf also understand that the hearing are part of the body. So unless we both come to the same conclusion, we're going to be separate bodies. And somehow we have to recognize the strengths of each one, giving independence to each one, and yet still be one. And that is the challenge, and that has been one of the hindrances, in my opinion, of the growth of the deaf. If I may just say this, a little commentary. My observation has been that the deaf have felt, because of some abuse over the years, that the hearing are not on their side. And I have fought that for many, many years. And I know that the deaf have felt excluded, but sometimes the hearing don't understand how you feel. And I've seen it on both sides because I've worked with both groups. So sometimes the deaf feel that the hearing aren't interested, and the hearing, as I read a quote from an author last night, what you then have the feeling both sides think the other side isn't interested, and we have a standoff. I'm interested in us finding a way of working together, and I know the folks on the platform well, that that's their desire. And I'm just trying to verbalize what some people have felt, and Noe knows very well what I'm talking about. So we can overcome that, but we need to surface the problem so we can deal with it. That's all I'm saying. And I say it in a constructive way.
Yes. Just going up to say hello is a demonstration of saying, that I don't have hard feelings against you. For example, this morning, what was that lady's name? What was her name? The one with the child. Oh, I'm not good with names. Oh, shame on me. But she came up to me and said, "Oh, that was a good story," talking to Chuck about that was a really good children's story. I enjoyed that story. I'd never heard that. And just talking with one another, and then that person actually brought up another story about an animal. So there was a conversation going on, and that was a good opportunity to share. And if the opportunity is there, take it. Doesn't matter if there's an interpreter or not. Use whatever resources that you have. Say, "Hi, happy Sabbath," with the little signs that you know, but be assertive and show the person that you have no prejudice feelings against them. I think that's a really good start. I often approach hearing people and they don't know how to talk with me, and like happy Sabbath, that's all they know. It's like, well, that's okay. But you know what? I try to demonstrate that I don't have any hard feelings against them. I cherish them as a brother or a sister in the Church of Christ. And, I want to show that I wish them a happy Sabbath too. And so it's important to demonstrate that we have no sense of separatism. We all need that sense of belonging.
No, if I could just ask you one thing. I'm sorry, and I know I'm interrupting. But what I would like you and Daryl and Esther to address, why interpreters stand where they do, why they do what they do, how can a church cooperate with the main line of the church and still get the message off to the deaf when the deaf are in the congregation?
I'm actually thinking I might allow Esther to speak on that because she has a lot of experience with that too. But I would like to briefly state, I know we're going to be going over time, sorry Larry, but the reason why we have interpreters in church, as you can see, that the deaf have a visual language, so they need interpreters. And where we stand, so if we were, for example, to have a person start speaking, and if the person's not up front, for example, and you hearing people are like, well, who's speaking? I don't see where they're speaking. I hear them, but I don't see them. It'd be very similar to what the deaf need as far as having a visual language. They need to be able to see the interpreter and the person speaking. Want to add more to that, Esther?
The people behind me. Because it is a visual language, it's a direct line of sight. And people visual needs. There are some that have low vision as well. And so that is something to take into consideration. There is not a one-size-fits-all, just on the person or people. Then you have the issue of churches don't all look the same. They look very different. You have different sizes, you have different things that are going on the platform. You have different platform sizes, you have stairs, sometimes you don't have stairs. There are so many things to consider. So, simple question is answered. Ask the deaf and the interpreter what works best for them. Let them figure it out. And then try to work together. If it doesn't work because something else is going on, work around that as best as you can. But it's simple. It's really a simple answer. Talk with the people with the need for the interpreter. See what they need. People with low vision may not want the interpreter far away from them. They may want them to sit so close that their knees are touching. So there's a lot of things to consider when you're talking about interpreting. But we definitely try to put the interpreter as close to the speaker as possible, where it's visual. We try to keep them where it's not necessarily too high. You might have noticed that Daryl and I did not stand on the platform. Some people think that we should have. It gives us more attention to what we're doing. But our desire is not to get attention. Our desire is to simply to serve. And some deaf people get very uncomfortable looking up for a long period of time. So you have to make sure that they're comfortable in watching the interpreter. You also have lighting issues that are to be considered. The interpreters may need to be standing where it's visually better, where they can be seen in the light. A lot of things, a lot of factors that go into it. So that's why it's important to communicate with your deaf member and the interpreter to see what is best.
If I may, just a quick illustration on this, because Daryl and Esther and Noe, one of my responsibilities is to plan for the deaf interpretation at a general conference session. So you got thousands of people out here, and yet we want the deaf to feel important. Where do we seat the deaf? In a group, you got people down front, you got bleachers on the side, you got thousands of people out there. Where do the deaf want to be? So I take Noe every year with me when we plan for GC session, and we go to the special arena, or what do they call it, stadium, and I say, all right, let's figure out where do we want the deaf? All right, now we're going to put the deaf over here. Do you want them real close or back? We go to the bleachers. Then we ask the question, where will the interpreter be? Because we're going to have more than one interpreter. Where? Because you have to rotate normally, what is it, 20 minutes about?
15 to 20.
15 or 20?
15 to 20.
So 15 to 20 minutes, we rotate interpreters. So we usually try to have 3. They vary from year to year, but we try to have 3, and they're interpreting. So one year, I think, Daryl, you were with us, we had up on a platform, and we wanted it to be broadcast live for 3ABN, Hope Channel, and Hope Channel, so we had to work out cameras, we had to work out light. Then if you're going to have them setting up on a stage on the side there so that they are level with the bleachers, then you have to get stairs set up. All these kinds of things only work not by me, as all of them have said, Esther has just said, we ask them.
Yep.
Where do you think this would work? Then my work is to negotiate with the event planner for the general conference to see if we can accommodate that. And I can tell you, over the years, as they have become acquainted with the needs of the deaf, the whole attitude has changed.
Yes.
The attitude has changed because now they understand more of the culture. But first, they compared the interpretation with language translation.
Yes.
And that was the first obstacle we had to get over, because they did not understand we had to change every 20 minutes and that we had to have certain visual requirements. And it was amazing to see how the change goes.
I do want to add that interpreters are not part of the program. We're not the speaker, we're not the musician. We are actually just simply facilitating access to information. We're like a channel. We're just going back and forth. And so I hope that no one ever feels intimidated by having an interpreter up on the platform if need be, or sharing the front, feeling like maybe the speaker might. I've come across this where speakers feel like, well, if you're interpreting for me, then like they're looking at you, and I'm losing my audience because they're looking at the interpreter. That might happen a little bit, but we're not there to steal the show. We're there to facilitate communication. So anyway, I don't know if you want to add anything to that, but
I think you did a beautiful job. I wanted to pretty much emphasize that we weren't stealing the show, but yes, we did have a hand.
Yes, when I was teaching school for my first 6 years, I was in a situation where we had a hearing handicap wing, and students would come to my classroom when they felt they were able to understand lip reading. They didn't do any signing at that time. And one of the things I noticed at recess time was the way the deaf students would be aggressive in their communication with the hearing students. And like if their ball got into where somebody else was, they'd go over and take it away from them because that's their way to I went back. Does that still hold true in church, where if a deaf person wants to speak with you, are they going to come to you and get your attention?
Mm-hmm.
Chuck is saying, Boyd has more experience. Well, let's see, today, nowadays, well, sometimes a person who feels like he can't communicate because he can't talk, or maybe he doesn't want to write, they can sometimes maybe be aggressive in communicating. It doesn't mean they're angry. They just were trying to demonstrate that they're serious about something. They're not trying to be angry or anything like that. You know, someone might, I need your attention, look at me, and it may come across as being out of anger, but not necessarily. You know, we're all very complex people. There is not like, oh, there's this, deaf people are all like this. You know, yes, deaf people are like this with many variances within that. Some deaf kids went to a deaf school their whole education career. I you know, went to school. I'm a dual citizen. I'm a Canadian. And some go to a regular public school. They're mainstreamed. And so they have a different experience than those that grow up in a deaf school. They actually look at each other, and they sometimes don't relate to one another. They don't understand each other. There's trying to come to a middle ground and seeing what that is, because they have, you know, everyone has a need, and trying to find a way to meet those needs by compromise. But we need to remember, we are all one, and we all need to look to one, Jesus. So when we have it in our mind that we want to be like Jesus, it will all work out as we try to do things as Jesus would. So we're going to have struggles. We're always going to have struggles. The church is always going to have struggles, but we just do our best and do the best that we can with everyone.
I see one more hand. I know we're way over time. I'd like to take your question, though, so go ahead and ask it.
Because signing is visual,
Yes.
does that mean it's also international?
Ha 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 ha.
Okay, the brief answer is no, unfortunately. But deaf people have this set up what's called gestuno, which is basically it's gesturing, like, you know, you point like mom and dad. It's a certain way of doing it. There's a way of communicating that is similar around. Like we recently had a deaf expo that you can use that. It's a World Deaf Expo. You can use that like year. You can. There's numbers that we've come up with. Is, you know, just that is the same. We don't sign like that. That's not signing, but it's a point of contact. In Europe, they have so many different languages. You have British Sign Language. You have they have a totally different mechanism for doing the alphabet. So they need, being so close to each other, they need some way to communicate a little bit easier across the country lines. But does it help? Yeah, it helps. But is it good for dialogue and discussion and thought, deep thought? No, it's very basic. I think there's maybe only 200 signs officially. And every country seems to have, it's like language. You know, every country has its own language and dialect. You know, some languages are similar, so you can understand some things. Like I can understand some British Sign Language. There's some similarities. But we can understand one another if you give it a little time. Are we out of time? Okay.
Yeah, we're over time. Oh, Tim, did you have a question? Like 2 seconds, hurry.
When you're talking about voice to text, it really depends on your own voice. Because some do not recognize your voice. Like I've noticed that when you're using voice to text, some people will say death instead of deaf, and they mean very different things. Technology is not perfect, so I think we need to end this segment.
Yes, we do need to end. But I wanted to mention 2 things. First of all, that if you have any questions and you really need answers, please feel free to come up to either Chuck or Boyd. They'd be happy, or myself, if you have a question for me, we're happy to answer any questions that you have. And the other thing is that we brought material to share. And if you are interested, we have 2 things. Chuck and I had got together and decided what we wanted to share with you. One is a pamphlet for Three Angels Deaf Ministries. It's an Adventist affiliate ministry that we have here in the North American Division. It's really exciting that if you have any questions about deaf, or if you have a deaf friend that you'd like to get connected by resources, that's one good resource. There's pamphlets out there if you're interested. The other thing is a book called Can You Hear Us? The author is actually the one interpreting for us at the moment, Hester Doss. We use that frequently in churches to share more information about hearing and deaf. It's a really great resource to have. If you're curious or if you know someone who'd be interested, please feel free to take what you need, because we brought plenty to share. And those are out in the lobby area. You're welcome to take them as you need. Thank you for your time, and we have enjoyed this discussion with you.
I am so proud of this team. Let me just say a couple things real quickly. You didn't talk about international sign language, because I think that came up, but there is an international sign language, especially promoted by some people in Europe, but it is not universal just because it says it's universal. I've heard, my understanding is that there are over 300 different sign languages. One of the challenges we have, for example, is the British Sign Language. They can read the captioning, but I understand that the actual sign language is certainly not the same, and there are some changes with it. International. North America does not really recognize what some call international sign language, and I'm certainly no expert at. That's what I've heard. Yeah, well, and so we haven't gone in that particular direction. Also, another important point for you to recognize with the deaf ministry, that is, for the first time in the history of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, as far as I know, we had a delegate who was deaf at the last General Conference session. That was a major breakthrough, and that person is who I called. I don't know what I am anymore. I'm a has-been, but I called in Pastor Jeff Jordan, who is deaf. He's the only Seventh-day Adventist deaf pastor who is deaf, who has a Master of Divinity degree. Can you imagine someone finishing college and then doing 3 years in seminary with a Master of Divinity degree? I'm just so proud of him. I brought him on because I understand that to do the deaf work, we need people who understand the culture. Yes. And so he's there. We also hired, just so you know, the first, as far as I know, a deaf employee for the General Conference. She worked part-time as the webmaster. And that's Amanda Colgan, who is no longer doing that. She's changed over to be with Three Angels Deaf Ministry, working with them. So we're very happy. We're making progress, and you need to understand that. We gave a little extra time. We're going to run a little late, but we wanted you to know this is the first area, and so we've given a lot of emphasis. So thank you, panel. I'm very proud of each one of you, and they're my kids, and so we're happy for that. Now then, I'm going to be talking faster than I should. Let me explain this logo up here. We had a different logo originally with the deaf, and that's still used, but not as much. It was for the deaf, and we developed that from its hands up, praising God, and we have that. We had pins made of that. Then when we came into Adventist Possibility Ministries, we wanted to have an umbrella that covered all of them. So what you see on the screen up here is our official Adventist Possibility Ministries logo. You'll notice that at the very top is a cross. You see that? Yeah, it does show up there. And that cross, then the roof representing the church, and within that, it looks like a puzzle. And it's somewhat similar of a symbol as you will see with autism. But we think it's different, okay? So it's what we think that matters. Some people say, no, that's an autism. No, I don't see an autism symbol with a cross and a roof on it. So we have distinguished that. But what we do like about it is that the blue that you see there is a blue representing the person with special needs who is included within the church. So it's the idea of inclusiveness, and because there is the cross at the top, it is Jesus who makes us all feel included as one body. So that's the message that we're saying. Now, I have some pins. Some of you I've been able to see and given you the pin. I'm going to ask, pardon? I do need some help. Always need more help. If you don't have one, take one. And then after it goes around to everybody, and you would like another one for another person that's not here, for example, just raise your hand and we'll give you one too. So, what you will see with this pen, though, is at the bottom of the church, you'll see SNM. Have any idea what that would mean? That was the old name, Special Needs Ministries. So that's what that will mean. So when you see that, I'm still wearing it. But please understand that you become an ambassador. And so when you talk about it, you talk about inclusion. You talk about in Jesus we're one, and we want to make sure that everyone feels included. I would suggest that you go to our website, Adventist Possibility, just go possibilityministries.org. At the very beginning, I put there a list of the concepts, basic concepts of Possibility Ministries. You can see about 8 or 9 different key points that I really want to make strong on that. If you go to the About section, you'll see the director's statement, a statement by me. But if you go to that same website, each of the 7 ministries, including deaf ministries, is outlined briefly. And I'll talk more about that after the next presentation. There's another one that's coming up. Any questions on that? We had too much time this morning and not enough time right now, so we're going to fly by a little fast. Any other questions? Because we know you get tired, but stay with us. We've got some good stuff coming. Yes?
I have a concern. You're stating that you want to help special needs people, but the conference and the church is neglecting to educate the special needs population. Case in point, my granddaughter has special needs. She is not able to go to an Adventist school because they do not have the ability to meet her needs.
Amen? Amen. Now, we've got some educators here. Here's a special needs. Isn't that what you were doing, Nancy? So, you've addressed a very important point. Very important point. And I will say this. See, I got too many stories, Carolyn, I know. So let me just say this much. Someone found out who I was and where I was. They sent me a note with an issue exactly like you said, almost exactly. I almost looked to make sure you're not the same person. And she said, I have a daughter that I sent to one of our academies in this union, okay? And she had autism, okay? Not severe, more in the Augsburger's category, if you're familiar with that. But she was able to communicate, but she had her uniqueness. And the faculty didn't know how to relate to her, the students didn't relate with her and all that. And so her student had to leave. That bothers me, okay? She wrote to me. I ended up writing an article on the Adventist Review, which I'm sure you all receive and read. And but anyway, I wrote the article about this, and I talk about, I forgot the title of it. I've written a number of articles in the Adventist Review. Another one is just now coming out, if any of you are familiar with Dialogue. Dialogue is with education. So the education department, and I talk about it there. But my point is not that you have addressed something that is a concern. Let me tell you real quickly one of the means of progress that we have made. One, a big one, and that is at the last General Conference session. I've told a few of you this. At the last General Conference session, I worked, and then it goes through committees, because I know the process. That's the advantage of having been an undersecretary. I know what it takes to do it. So I worked hard to develop an action for the General Conference session. Then it goes through multiple committees. So several people looked at it, made some important tweaks, very important, and then we took it to the last General Conference session. It passed. What's important about that? It is now going to be in the church manual. In the church manual, that means it is for every church. Partial answer to you is that every conference in the world now has to address the issue. They don't have to do anything, but they know it's there, and local churches will look at that. Yes?
My concern is when I have talked with conference officials and other people about this issue, the answer that I've gotten is we cannot afford it.
I know. I was going to come to that.
My feeling is put your money where your mouth is.
Well, I understand, and I've also been a conference president a couple times, okay? It is expensive, and we have to manage the budget that we have. And that money comes from you, okay? I think that there has to be a way of us coordinating with other agencies to provide these needs. I worked, there is a lady, for example, a friend of ours, in the Tacoma Park, Silver Spring area, by the General Conference. It's not because of the General Conference, but she was employed by the conference to work with the schools in that district with special needs. So that was a step in the right direction. It's expensive even for public education, but we do need, there is a need for it. The number of students we have is growing, and we have to do something. We need to raise the issue, and it's not something we can answer immediately. Nancy, do you have something?
I just wanted to say that if your granddaughter, grandchild is in the learning disabilities area, that's where my expertise are at. And I have served with quite a few students who are private schooled, and they've come to me in the public school setting, and I've provided, we had to work the whole structure of when this class time is going to happen for their academics, but I've also done it for homeschool parents whose children are special.
See, there is an answer. And if the first answer is money, then we're asking the wrong question. We have to go back to your root question and say, how can we find an answer if we don't have the money to have an independent in every school? Okay? Let's work together to find the answer. But we won't know the answer unless you raise the question. And you have raised the question. But I'm saying that as we move in this direction, and we have it, for example, now in the church manual, the awareness is raised. It was raised at the General Conference. It was not there at first. Now there is a sensitivity. Very warm welcome by the General Conference. Elder Wilson has made that possible by bringing me on and by his own support. And from there, we got the church manual. We now have representatives in all the world divisions. So we are making progress, but we don't have an answer today for your question. And your question is relevant and important. So please don't think I'm just pushing you aside.
Can I say something to that?
Please.
I understand the sister is concerned. One other thing you have to realize too is that that is not a field that you find many individuals studying. You don't find many people going to college, university. There's not a large number of people going there to study
Special needs.
I happen to be working in an area here in Washington State, where we work with families and children. And there are some agencies which do help. So if an individual is not going to help, if she's sending her child to some Adventist school and there's no help there for that person, there are some agencies here in Washington.
Do you work with the conference?
I'm the coordinator of Christian Ministries for the conference, but I'm also a counselor.
Prison ministry.
Oh, personal ministries.
Prison ministry.
Prison ministries for the Washington Conference?
Yeah, but I'm also a counselor, and I work with families and children in this state.
That's why we have this meeting.
There are agencies. Which
Yeah. See, unless we have these kind of forums like we're having right now, your question, some partial answers at least, and here, see, this is why we have to do what we do. This is why I keep begging. Have the churches hold these kind of conferences. Ryan, Jason, Alita. See, this is what we need to do, because we're just going to be stymied if we just say, well, we can't do it. We've got to do this. And there are students there. So out of that question that was raised by this other lady that I was telling you about, I just did a seminar on autism. I'm not an expert at that. I have a grandson who is autism, who is on that spectrum, but he's more of the high functioning side. He's graduating. He will be graduated from Walla Walla University in engineering. But it's been a struggle for him and for the family. Understand. And I'm going to talk about it here in just a moment, I think, if I get to it. But please understand that this kind of forum is what I have been begging for. Elita and Noe broke through the barriers, and we have this happening today. Elita, back there, raise your hand. I am so impressed with her organization. You saw the advertisements that went out. Noe and I have been talking about something like this, and she found the right person. So your conference is to be applauded. So let's not be, remember, we believe in possibilities.
Amen.
And so let's not get discouraged about it, but let's face the reality that something has to change. And we can do it. But it may, again, this is where the conference administration, the experience that I've had, I understand that other side. And there's never enough to do everything we want to do. So how do we do it? Well, let's don't just say we can't do it. Let's figure out what we can do to at least get the best answer we can have. So thank you for raising your question. Okay. Did everybody get a pen that wanted a pen? Anybody else need another pen? So wear it proudly. So I guess I will do my thing. Where's mine? I've done it so many times you think I'd learn, but I'm a slow learner. What happened now? Excuse me. Let's go with the next video. Do I just hit this? I think Brian's coming. Yeah.
It's being weird. Let's see here. What are you doing?
No, my is cramping.
Okay, so you played that one. You're
Caregiver.
here.
Yep. There we go.
There you go.
Thank you.
Yep.
Rose Carter said, "There are only 4 kinds of people in this world: those who have been caregivers, those who are currently caregivers, those who will be caregivers, and those who will need caregivers."
Brian?
Caregiving is universal. A caregiver tends to the needs of those with illness.
We're not seeing the video with a. There we go.
Injury or disability, like a spouse, parent, or friend. 50 million Americans are caregivers. Globally, 2 billion serve as caregivers. People who are disabled need caregivers, but caregivers need our support. They often experience exhaustion, isolation, depression, or burnout stress. This kind of stress can have a negative impact on the physical and mental health of the caregiver. Often it interferes with their social interactions, job performance, and relationships. Caregivers need our support and the resources to help them cope with demanding challenges. Discover more at possibilityministries.org.
We here are caregivers. All right. So you know a little bit about what was said already. One of the big challenges we face today in the Adventist Church and in the world in general is that caregivers are burning out, and yet we are dependent on their services. A few years ago, I was doing a seminar at, let me just check my time. A few years ago, I was doing a seminar at our college in England, Newbold College. And we had a nice group, and we were going through our presentations. And one family in the back, sitting at a table, it was a family actually, and a mother, father, and 2 children. One was very obviously disabled in some way. I thought it was on the autism spectrum, somewhere on that spectrum. And I was confident of that, and in fact I had heard about it. And I went back to that table and I said to the father, or to the husband, "So how are you doing?" He somewhat smiled and said, "Good." That's what he was supposed to say. So that's what he said. And then I turned to his wife and I said, "And how are you doing?" And then the tears started to go. And I looked back at the husband and he said, "Yeah, it's hard. It's hard." You see, with a child with autism, it's 24/7 with no breakup. Especially with any kind of disability, or disability can be age, it can be physical disability, it can be just mental, whatever it may be, and elder care, all of those kinds of things can be hindrances and difficult. They explained that they were just wearing down. They had no time off and no time just with them as a couple. The demands were great. They were devoted parents. I could tell that they needed some caregiving. It was after that visit that some others that I felt we needed to add caregiver to our list of ministries for Possibility Ministries. If we don't take care of the caregivers, who is going to take care of those with disabilities? And they burn out. And so this and one more were added, the bereavement were added as our last two to make our 7 ministries. But it's important. There are 2 broad types of caregivers. You'll notice here that there are the informal or the unpaid caregivers. They are involved in assisting others with activities of daily living and or medical needs. Helping them just daily. Can be a spouse, a partner, a family member, a friend, or a neighbor that they're taking care of. But they're taking care of them. They're not being paid for it, but nevertheless, it is taking effort on their parts. There are also those who are caregivers who are formal, paid caregivers, and we greatly appreciate them as well. They are paid care providers, providing care in one's home or in a care setting such as daycare, residential facility, or long-term care facility. All are caregiving. All are having to give of themselves for the welfare of someone else. Rosalind Carter, Carrie and I met her once when we were in Georgia. She says this: I know firsthand the demands of caregiving. When I was 12 years old, my father became terminally ill with leukemia. I was one of 4 children, and as the oldest and as a daughter, my 34-year-old mother depended on me. Since returning home from the White House, we have supported many members of Jimmy's family who have died of cancer. And I helped care for my mother until she died in 2000 at the age of 94. As I've traveled this country speaking about caregiving, person after person has stepped forward to tell me their own stories. So many people giving care to their loved ones feel isolated, inadequate, and despairing. Anybody felt that way? See? What do we do? How do we help those individuals? I don't think it's something that we can ignore. She continues, at a time when more and more Americans are called to give care, it is critically important that we do all we can to support caregivers. We have a suggestion for you, but this is an important ministry. You remember the story of the Good Samaritan. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, as your neighbor as yourself. And some wise law expert said, well, who's my neighbor? Who's my neighbor? And Jesus, instead of answering directly, told the parable of the Good Samaritan. He gives 2 people who walked by and saw a wounded man lying alongside the road. He was actually a Jew, laying by there. He had been robbed and beat up and hurt and maimed in some way. And 2 people walked past him. You know the story. And then came the Samaritan, someone who should have had an automatic resistance, prejudice against him. But he stopped and he took care of him. Not only at the spot, but took him to give him lodging and care even when he was gone. I like to say And my purpose for sharing this is there are many good Samaritans. And we sometimes forget that emphasis. We give the emphasis on things that we should be doing. But right now, I want to give emphasis and appreciation for those of you who are caring for people, or who feel the need to, or at least see the need. If not in your immediate family, it could come any time. I've had 2 illnesses that are pretty serious. One, in my last pastorate, everybody who had that disease that I had, my lungs, died. My wife was my caregiver. And it wasn't fun, it wasn't pleasant. There were some aspects of it that were not good. But she was my caregiver. And it was during those months when we would hear that, other people died who had my rare lung disease. And I thought, I see what she's doing. She's cleaning up after me. She's taking care of all the things that are related to the medical needs at home. But I've learned since then that it's not only in my family, but in other family, where family members are taking care of other family members. We have people who are taking care of children who are autistic in some way. What are we doing for them? We know that many people, many couples who have a child with autism separate or even divorce because they burned out. And we've got to recognize that there is a need. What can we do? Even if they just had a date night once a month, when they could leave the pressure and just go to a restaurant or go to some event so that they could have some time together away from the stress. If we could provide even that, it would be helpful. There's a diversity of care involved with this. Approximately 43.5 million caregivers. There are some that say, Rosalind Carter said 43.5 million. Other materials that I have found say that there are 65 million or more who are caregiving. Approximately 30.2 million unpaid for caregivers for 50 plus and older. So with people 50 and over, that huge number, 82% care for one other adult, 15% care for 2 adults, and 3% for 3 or more. It's a humongous amount. Approximately 39.8 million caregivers care for adults with disability or illness. And Jesus said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind. Love your neighbor yourself. An expert in the law was trying to quiz Jesus and trying to trap him. The Samaritan served by living his life that way, helping a person. He demonstrated what was really in his heart. At the heart of caregiving ministry is the unselfish love for others. But even if you have the very highest motive, you will get tired and exhausted. That kind comes from within and reveals itself in the way we care. 3, there are millions of Samaritans today, and we do want to recognize them and express our sincere appreciation for those of you who are already doing this. Ellen White makes this statement: love is the basis of godliness. Whatever the profession, no man has pure love to God unless he has unselfish love for his brother or sister. You see, we have that as part of who we are. But there is such a thing as caregiver stress, and let's notice some of the symptoms of this right now. Caregiver stress is a physical and emotional strain that develops from providing continuous care for another person. It can be a child, an elderly person, or someone who suffers from an illness or an accident. And when the stress is prolonged, it can cause serious physical and mental health problems for those who are providing the care. Then there are what we call sandwich caregivers. Sandwich caregivers are those who care for their parents and their own family and are caught between the two. See? We're caring for somebody here, but we have responsibilities over here. It might be our own family, it might be work, whatever it is, and we get caught in between, and that creates some of the stress. Feeling caught between the needs of each can create stress, and that stress can play out in numerous ways. Here are some physical signs. Now, I'd like to say at the beginning that some of these physical signs can be signs of other kinds of stress too, not just this kind, but it certainly is relevant here. Frequent headaches or body aches, always feeling tired, sleeping too much or too little, rapid weight gain or weight loss, abusing alcohol, recreational drugs, or prescription medications. All these things can shape up and perhaps directed back to a caregiving stress that is ongoing. Emotional signs that can come. Moodiness, easily angered or irritated, persistent sadness or hopelessness, lack of interest in previously enjoyed activities, feelings of loneliness or isolation from other people. Symptoms. Be aware of this. If this isn't happening to you, and you see it happening to someone else who is doing caregiving, take notice. This could be related to the caregiving stress that they are experiencing. Long-term symptoms. Serious mental health issues such as anxiety and depression. This can come about when we're trying to help someone else. Weakened immune system, digestive issues, alcoholism or drug addiction, increased risk for chronic diseases, short-term memory loss, and issues paying attention to detail or issues that are at hand. These are all kinds of issues that come. Stress identify 6 areas of needed help. So I've pulled together these ideas to bring to your attention from people who are experts, and I just wanted to share this to alert you to some of the issues that we have to face in our support of caregivers. They've listed 6 here: health, emotions, lifestyle, profession, money, endurance. And this author has aligned them so that you can see the word underneath, help me. You take the first letters of each one of those and says, help me. If you begin to find these kinds of things emerging consistently. So practical ways of supporting caregivers, we want to just bring to your attention. 1, visit them. And make sure your visit isn't adding to their stress, okay? But visit them and let them know that you have an interest and a care in them. That's important. 2, take them shopping with you. Or pick up medicines that they have ordered for them. Take them to church. The idea of companionship, this idea of isolation is an issue that keeps raising up. Feeling isolated because they're always there. One of the things we've learned over the years too is that people who are always caring for their children, even though they're not under the typical idea here of caregiving, but they are caregiving. I mean, parents seldom have a chance to go to Sabbath school, adult Sabbath school. Finding an opportunity so that they can go to some of these places or go to church even. That is important. I've seen that happen many times as a pastor. Be present. Relieve the regular caregiver of things that they are willing to let go of. Don't go in and be the boss of their home. That's not going to help. But offer yourself to help do various things. Some people will be willing to let you do their laundry or clean their house or whatever. But ask before you do. It's always a good rule. Cook for them and with them if possible. Whoops. 10 ways of giving support. Visit places of interest, such as museums. Take them with you. Or you do it yourself. Find a chance to break away from the routine if you can. Escort to the doctor's office. Help them remember what was said. I can tell you right now, I need a caregiver. I can't remember all that I need to remember. Send a regular letter, an email, or even a Valentine's card to them. As a reminder, let them know that they're special. Remember what we talked about the other night. People need to know that they are special, that they are valued, and that they have a purpose in their life. If you can help them do that, then you will help them a great deal. Oops. Send individuals with Alzheimer's enjoy even a coloring book. This is something that's been very interesting. I've seen this and talked with a number of people about this. Just a coloring book can be a real help. So provide some crayons, provide some paint, provide some coloring books, whatever, is a way of helping. And grocery shopping. It is strange. I never until the recent years, never wanted to go grocery shopping. You know why I like to go now? Because it's a break from my routine. It's just a break. I mean, it seems a little strange. If I can push the grocery cart, I have been elevated. See? Usually my wife pushes it and I just feel so demoted. So, not true. Offer to do light housekeeping. Those are the kinds of things, practical things to try to help people do that. A major objective in our support of caregivers is help the person realize that you see value in their life, that God loves them, and that they have not been forgotten by you, the church, or by God. I'm not an official pastor, but I cannot remove the role of pastor from me, okay? That's just who I am. I can't, it's in my DNA. So in my Sabbath school class, I see somebody who hasn't been there for a long time. And he was there. And he sat right back over there on that side in the rear, and he's not there. What's happening to him? So after some time, I say, where is Fred? Where's Fred? So I search and find his phone number. And I call him. The first minute or so, it just, hey, I'm fine, don't worry. No, I just can't. I've got a little problem, I can't go. A little more conversation, relaxed conversation, and then I begin to find that nobody has contacted him. Doesn't seem like anybody really cares. 2 weeks after I talked to him, two weeks or so, whatever problem he had with his feet, he was able to make it to Sabbath school. Sometimes excuses for absence are just excuses and not telling us the real reason. We need to understand and care. I'm very concerned about our technology age because we think that just sending an email is enough. People care. They feel it inside, and we need to help them and let them know that we care. It really does make a difference. John Milton said, loneliness was the first thing that God's eye named not good. Boy, when I read that, I said, boy, I've got to save that. The first thing that God's eye caught was named not good was when loneliness was setting in. Adam and Eve. And we begin to see that. God says it's not good, we need to hear what he says. Walking with a friend, Helen Keller, the blind lady. Walking with a friend in the dark is better than walking alone in the light. I'm a collector of quotes. I've got, I know, a few hundred quotes that I've picked up from my reading. And now I want to just share with you a story, and I'm going to read it because I think the way it's written is better than the way I could tell it. It's one of these stories that I have saved over the years. And one of my favorite authors is a lady by the name of Ann Kimmel. And she talks about how she discovered a lady by the name of Mrs. Grissom. Listen to the story. It was Saturday night, and I ran across the street to get the vacuum cleaner. It was late, and I was tired, and in a hurry. And Mrs. Grissom handed me the vacuum cleaner, and I looked into her tired, old, wrinkled face. And I don't know why, but I took the cleaner and started to go, and I said to her, "Oh, Mrs. Grissom, God loves you a lot." And the tears just began to spill down her face. And she said, "Could you wait just a minute?" She went back into her house and got a plaque off the wall and brought it out. It was a picture of weeds. Just ugly old weeds smeared all over the picture. And underneath all those ugly weeds were these words. Weeds. Nobody likes weeds. Nobody carries them in a bouquet or wears them in a corsage. But God waters the weeds. And she looked up. You know, Anne, all my life I felt like a weed. Mrs. Grissom, could I pray with you? I didn't know anybody went all through life feeling like a weed. There are times when I feel like a weed, but I didn't know anybody felt like a weed all their life. Really? I just came to get the vacuum cleaner. But I was wondering, could we just stop for prayer? She said she'd like that, and we went into her little apartment, and I said, would you like to hear a little song that I sing a lot in a big, lonely world? I will serve thee because I love thee. You have given life to me. So I'm not just a weed, and neither are you, because he gives us life. Heartaches, broken pieces, ruined lives are why you died on Calvary. That's why he came, Mrs. Grissom. Your touch was what I longed for. You see, he makes flowers out of weeds. You have given me life. And I prayed with her. When I finished praying with her, I looked in her eye. Oh, Mrs. Grissom, I love you. You are very special, lady, to me. And the tears began spilling, and the tears began spilling down her face. I've never been special to anyone before. I picked up the vacuum, and I ran across the street to my little apartment and threw myself across the bed. Oh God, it's so ironic. The people who live closest to us are the ones we overlook, the ones we fail to reach out to. Jesus, use me in the neighborhood. If I'm out to change the world, I'll have to start in my neighborhood. So the next morning was Sunday, and I called the florist at 7:30 a.m. and asked him to put together the most beautiful bouquet he had ever fixed. I wanted the flowers, that looked the prettiest, that smelled the best. I mean, the loveliest bouquet he had ever made. Well, look, lady, it's Sunday morning. I barely have my house slippers on, but sir, you don't understand. It's for a lady, very special lady. And I want her to know that she's not a weed, but that she's beautiful. Yes, ma'am, I'll see what I can do. Just write on the card, Bright Hope, Love, Ann. The very next day, she knocked on my door with tears running down her wrinkled face. I never had a bouquet in my house before, and for the first time in my life, I really knew God loved me. I'm out to change the world in love. That's my hope. That's our hope. Because we see the possibility in every situation. We have the possibility of changing lives just because of who we are and who we want to be and what we want to become, and then they can become. And that's Possibility Ministries. And that's the kind of people, that's the kind of church we want to become and remain and be called on to make those people who feel isolated and lonely and feeling like a weed, that they might feel like a beautiful corsage. Let's pray. Father in heaven, thank you again. You have been with us. Your Holy Spirit has spoken to us. We can think of people who are caregivers who are wearing out. We would pray that even in this church, a committee could be formed that would support caregivers and finding ways of letting the church tell them that they matter and that we care for them. Thank you, Lord, for your compassion as shown to us by you being the Samaritan and we, the wounded ones along the road. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. You know, you need to read that story sometime and realize that in that story, Jesus is the Samaritan. Jesus is the one, and we are the ones who are really alongside the road. So I have a request for you. You've been sitting for a while. I'd like you to stand where you are. Do not leave. You'll be in trouble and you will have to pay a fine. So stand and get space between you. We do this at the general conference during long meetings. Put your arms out on the side like this. Okay? All right? Are you still holding them out? Good. Keep them there. Now let's go round and round. Forward. Everything forward. We're going to take off pretty soon. Okay? All right? Keep going. Oh, don't let your arms down. No, not yet. No. So we'll give you a break in just a moment. So let's go backwards. Backwards. All right. Let's do some more. So, all right. Sometimes we even jog in place. We jog in place, but we're not going to do that. Now, take your arms in front and back. Back and back. Oh, I didn't say yet. No, we're still out here. All right, here we go together. Back, 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 back. Wait, what? Have you ever played Simon Says? Okay. All right, let's go up and down. Up and down. Now, when we're going to raise our hands up, we're going to, if you can, stand on your tiptoes and go up together. Up, down, up, down. Aha! All right. Thank you very much. Be seated. Now, did not feel better to do that? Just every once in a while.
We live on a planet with 8.
Okay. Are we ready? Is this the next one, Brian? All right. We're just going to go right ahead and go into it. This one is on bereavement for spousal loss. One of the things we learned during the COVID issue was that there were many people who were dying and losing a spouse during this time. I believe it was in the Inter-American Division where there were around 600 in a space of time that had lost a spouse. Pastors, we're talking about, workers. And when I heard that, and prior to that even, I said, you know, we need to do something for those who have lost a spouse. And as we were doing that, I don't remember if I told this story or not. Did I tell this story about the Sligo thing publicly? I've talked to some people individually, and I don't remember if I said it publicly. So one of the things, I'm sitting at home, I'm doing my devotions before Sabbath. I haven't told this story here. All right. So I got to check with Carolyn. She has a memory I don't. So I'm sitting at home on Sabbath morning, and I'm thinking, I'm reading, and it's about spousal loss. Widows. I remember I was telling Nancy this. Yeah, that's where it was. And so throughout Scripture, there is what's called the vulnerable four. The vulnerable four, you see over and over again. You have the widow, the orphan, the poor, and the foreigner. And those four are throughout Scripture used symbolically by God to talk about our care for those who are vulnerable. And we have four examples, not limited to those, but there are four that are there. Widows being one of them. And I'm sitting at home on my devotion Sabbath morning before heading off for Sabbath school and church, and I'm thinking, wow, what are we doing for the widows? I haven't heard of any program being done for the widows. And so then at about that time, I said, we've got to do something. And so we began to develop a ministry for widows. I got to church. We were going to the Sligo Seventh-day Adventist Church there in Tacoma Park, Maryland. And I got there and sat down in Sabbath school. I'm not doing anything. I'm not teaching or anything that Sabbath. And I'm sitting there observing, and two ladies get up to speak during the introductory part of Sabbath school. And guess what they're talking about? They've both been widows. One had been a widow, remarried. The other one was still a widow, and they both felt the need to start a ministry for widows. And I'm sitting there hearing them talk about that, and I had just had this impression back at home before I left. And I said, this is not an accident. This is the way God speaks to us. We want to act in His will where He is working. And now I see Him working. That's a key principle. Sometimes I'm a great one for contingency plans and doing strategic planning and this kind of thing. And then say, God, please come and bless the plans that I have come up with. See, it's backwards. It's backwards. I need to say, God, where are you working? And then I join you. And this is one of those ministries that evolved out of that experience. So here's my thought. So let's just listen to this.
We live on a planet with 8 billion people, yet millions feel alone. Loneliness is a global pandemic. It's especially true for those who have lost a spouse through death or divorce. The death of a spouse is the #1 stressor on the stress scale. 40% of women and 13% of men 65 and over are widowed. For many couples, most of their life revolves around their spouse. Then one day, there's a sudden vacuum. Where love and companionship existed, there are now feelings of sorrow, mourning, shock, anger, fear, or depression. Processing grief can be an emotional and physical challenge, but legal or financial problems may hamper the grieving process. Socially, the world of friends can change dramatically. Life will never be the same. Although the loss is permanent, grief is not forever. There is hope. Restoring dignity, personal worth, and meaning in life is at the heart of Possibility Ministries. Discover more at possibilityministries.org.
So we've entitled this, It Hurts to Lose a Loved One. Many of you have experienced that. Sometimes it's a spouse, sometimes it's a parent, sometimes it's a child, sometimes it's a friend or a close colleague. I've discovered as a pastor that when we are dealing with people who have suffered a loss like this, we are at the heart of our humanity. Because at that heart, we find so many things coming through, bisecting and dissecting, and all these things converging all at one time. It calls for a compassionate heart to understand. And that's what we want to do here. So, bereaving the loss of a spouse. So we started off with our church there in Sligo, and we began developing a ministry. I supported them and encouraged them, and a ministry began to develop, which we'll show you in just a moment. But losing someone in death is never easy. Romans 1:22 says, "We know that the whole creation has been groaning as in the pains of childbirth right up to the present time." I mean, this world is cracking up. This world is in serious trouble. And we begin to find that even the earth seems to be, we groan, it just seems as though the whole earth is growing. We talk about global warming, we talk about wars, we talk about violence, we talk about all sorts of abuse. And it is a sad thing. Pain and suffering were never part of God's plan, but neither has He abandoned us. Never has He abandoned us when it does come. Isaiah reminds us that the day is coming when the Lord will swallow up death forever and will wipe away all the tears from all the faces. I mean, it's going to come to an end, folks. It is coming to an end. But until then, we live in this abnormal world. When Jesus saw his mother there when he was hanging on the cross, and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said, "Woman, here is your son." And to the disciple, "Here is your mother." And from that time on, the disciple took her into his home. I found, as I was reading through commentaries and reading, I found a very interesting explanation of Jesus using the word woman. Some people have said, that seems so cold. But another way of looking at it says this. This is by Matthew Henry. Excuse me. He says, he calls her woman, not mother, not out of any disrespect to her, but because mother would have been a cutting word to her, who was already feeling wounded with a grief of seeing her son on the cross. I thought that was a very interesting insight. It is painful for a parent to lose a child. It is painful for a parent, for a spouse to lose a spouse, even if it is in divorce. I was counseled not to include divorce at this time and just stay focused on the spouse. Sligo went ahead and included those who are losing a spouse through divorce even, or some kind of separation. And listen, it's pain. Whatever way you cut it, it's painful. And we need to find a place where pain can be comforted to some degree. Without taking sides, we don't have to take sides in a divorce. As one attorney told me once, he says, you can't make a pancake that there aren't two sides, okay? But the point is, there's still pain. And pain for a Christian is kind of like a magnet. We're drawn to try to help the person who is being painful. You know, I get upset with all the abuse that I hear about, but I'm concerned for even the abuser. Maybe I'm weird. But you know, some abusers are also caught up in their own mess and own trouble, and they also need some encouragement or strength, at least, without condoning what may have been done. So a ministry was added. Religion that, James says, religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this: to look after orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. Now, it is true that in times past, especially in certain countries still, widows are by themselves. They have no financial wherewithal. In fact, in some places, and I know of some, because the husband dies, the family receives all that the brother or the husband had. See? So it all goes back to them and leaves the widow penniless. I have a friend whose husband was killed in an accident, and the family wants to take back everything that they had because he was their family. So we have an issue of culture and all these kinds of things. But listen, we have to understand that there is we need to provide support. But let me focus for now on the loss of a spouse. As I saw what was developing, I said, we've got to do something that people can access and find some relief, some help, some comfort, some insights. And so we commissioned the development of a video. And so because my connections, I connected with a psychologist, Dr. Ann Hamill, who is a psychologist, also has her Doctor of Ministry degree, and she serves as our counselor, our psychologist for our missionaries. She was in Africa and lost her husband in a terrible accident. What I've done is and then what I did, I have a psychiatrist, maybe 2 psychiatrists and a psychologist who interview people who have lost a spouse. This is all part of a video that's online, and I hope that you will see it. I was talking to a lady called me about planning funerals. I said, I'm not ready yet, but maybe we should talk. And so I said, by the way, you might be interested when you called. I was working on this very talk. And she said, what were you working on? I said, and I told her about Ann Hamill and about my convictions and all this. And I looked at her and she was crying. And I discovered she lost her husband. And she says, I thought it happened 4 years ago, and I thought it was all behind me. But the way you were talking about it just brought it all back. And we began to talk about it. And I told her about this video. She says, I want to see it. I talked to her just recently, and she said, I haven't seen it yet, but I'm going to watch it this weekend, I think today. And then at the end of this sales talk that she was giving to me, I said, could I pray with you? And we prayed. This is a ministry that opens the door to reach out to people. That's who we are. It's in our church's DNA. So I'm going to play an excerpt from the first part of the video with Dr. Hamill. Forget the guy who introduces it because he didn't do a great job. But when she speaks, listen to what she says. Oh, it's the next slide. So let me read this if I can. I can't. To help meet the global need, we produced a video featuring psychologists and individuals who have gone through heart-wrenching experience of losing a spouse. Dr. Ann Hamill shares the tragedy she experienced in losing her husband while in mission service. She tells how she learned the difficult process of coping with her loss. Other psychologists, psychiatrists, and individuals who have lost their spouses also share. And you have that access. It's a special deal today. It's free. Okay? It is no understatement to say that our world is hurting from the pandemic that began over a year ago. While the economic impact has been great, our focus today is not about financial difficulties experienced by many. We want to spend a few moments talking about our relationships with one another and especially those whom we have loved deeply. We have invited Dr. Ann Hamill, a much respected psychologist who has faced her own personal traumas, to be our guest speaker for this webinar. Dr. Hamill received her PhD in counseling psychology from Andrews University and a Doctor of Ministry degree in formational counseling from Ashland Theological Seminary. One of her responsibilities is caring for and providing support for missionaries, especially during times of crisis. I believe you will understand why we have invited her to speak about finding joy in suffering, grieving for a loved one.
This past year has been a challenging and difficult year, unprecedented in so many ways. When the World Health Organization identified COVID-19 as a pandemic on March 11 last year, most of us had no idea how our lives would be impacted. My husband and 9 members of our family are in health care. On March 14, we met together to talk about how we, as a family, might be impacted by the pandemic and what steps we would take to keep safe and to keep those around us safe. We recognized that this would likely be our last in-person gathering as a family until the pandemic was over. We also recognized that healthcare workers across our nation would soon be engaged in a battle to save lives against an invisible enemy. So little was known about the virus at that time, but it was frightening to see what was happening in China and in Italy. At one point, my husband said that if the virus spread here, the way it had in Wuhan or in Italy, that we could very likely lose a family member. 12 months after the pandemic began, more than 2.6 million people have died from the virus. More than 500,000 here in the United States. And the virus is continuing to spread, and the number of people dying continues to increase. These 2.6 million people belong to families. They are missed and grieved by loved ones, by a husband or a wife, by children and grandchildren. They are someone's brother, someone's sister. These 2.6 million people belong to communities. They have friends and neighbors who also are grieving their loss. We have all been impacted by the loss of lives as a result of this pandemic. We can't listen to the news without hearing how many people have been infected and how many people have died. The death toll related to COVID-19 brings to the forefront of our awareness the sad reality that death is a part of our lives here on this earth. Our family confronted this reality last April when my brother-in-law developed a fever just 3 weeks after the pandemic began. Following guidelines, he self-isolated and began working from home. 4 days later, his symptoms were serious enough that he was admitted to the hospital. 3 days later, on Easter Sunday, he was transferred to the intensive care unit. 2 days after that, he was put on a ventilator. Approximately 20% of people with COVID develop symptoms serious enough that they need to be hospitalized, and about 5% of those are serious enough that they need to be in intensive care units. Putting a patient on a ventilator is considered a last resort measure to save a patient's life. In those early days of the pandemic here in the U.S., 80 to 85% of patients who were put on ventilators died. Like 2.6 million other families this past year, our family was facing a crisis. Each night, our family met on Zoom to get updates on my brother-in-law's condition and to pray. No one could visit him, not his wife, not his children, not even my husband. Day by day, we got the update that his condition was getting worse. My husband was working tirelessly to do everything he could to save his brother's life. But after 8 days on a ventilator, his organs were failing. His body was shutting down. With a heart rate of only 18, we feared that death was near. I could see the sadness on my husband's face when he came home from the hospital late that evening. He whispered to me as we went to bed that night. I wrote Lowell's death announcement before I left the hospital. I was afraid I wouldn't be able to do it after it happened. Grieving the death of a loved one is a painful process. My husband and his brother are identical twins. We live next door to each other. We have Sabbath lunches together each week. My husband and his brother have practiced medicine together for years, and now they run a health system together. They are and have always been a team in every sense of the word. The thought of my brother-in-law's death brought a deep sense of loss and sadness to my heart. I could only imagine how my husband was feeling, or how his wife and children were feeling. His death would leave a huge hole in our family. Grieving the death of a loved one symbolizes the value of that individual in the lives of those who grieve. It symbolizes the place they hold in our hearts and in our lives. The pain and suffering that we experience when we grieve reflects the strength of the bond between us. It hurts when death takes our loved ones from us, and the pain we experience can penetrate the very core of our being. Our family was fortunate and blessed that my brother-in-law survived. During the night, he made a miraculous turnaround. The next morning, for the first time since he entered the hospital, his test results and his vitals showed signs of improvement. As a family, we are deeply grateful and very fortunate that my brother-in-law was among the very small percentage of patients that survived after being on a ventilator. But many others have not been so fortunate. Not only have more than 2.6 million people died from COVID this past year, close to 57 million people have died from other causes, heart disease and cancer being the leading causes of death worldwide. 50% of deaths from all causes are among those 70 years of age and older. As we face the loss of so many lives as a result of this pandemic, I think it's helpful for us to remember that before the early 1800s, 50% of all deaths occurred during infancy and childhood, resulting in an average life expectancy of only 30 years. Prior to our understanding of how to prevent and treat infectious diseases, only 10% of the global population reached the age of 60. Historians tell us that prior to the scientific era, human beings lived with the constant presence of death. That the limits of human life were actually defined by infectious diseases. Diseases like the plague, measles, smallpox, tuberculosis, polio, and others. This year has been hard for all of us because COVID-19 is a new killer, an infectious disease that has crept into our lives, and to use the language of Scripture in John 10:10, like a thief who has come only to kill, to steal, and to destroy. Not only have we lost loved ones to death, we have been robbed of the privilege of visiting the sick and the elderly, robbed of time with grandparents and grandchildren, denied the privilege of sharing meals with friends or visiting neighbors. COVID is still a mysterious disease in many ways. When exposed, some people are infected while others are not. The disease is fatal to some, while others experience only mild symptoms or no symptoms at all. The infection and death rate around the world has not been evenly distributed. Some countries have been much harder hit than others. North and South America and Europe have been the hardest hit. Age and gender are also factors. 95% of COVID-19 deaths have occurred among those 50 years of age and older, with 88% being among those 60 years of age and older. Women live longer than men in every country in the world, but men have been 50% more likely to die of COVID than women have. Prior to COVID, many of us had come to believe that infectious diseases had been conquered, diseases that take the lives of children and used to wipe out large segments of the population. Then COVID entered our world, unexpectedly, like a thief, and caught us off guard. It has set off alarms in each of our hearts that are telling us that we are not safe. COVID has brought each of us to an awareness of just how fragile life is and how vulnerable we are.
So as we heard those sobering facts, after this, she tells her story about the loss of her first husband. It's a story you need to hear. And it was just a very moving experience to develop this video with other individuals who share as well. So we began thinking, what can we do? We've got a problem, and I want to share with you two different organizations. One is called Heartlifters, and this is the organization that began there at our Sligo Church in Maryland. Heartlifters does certain events to try to help. They organize around trying to help those who have experienced the loss of a spouse. Workshops, they have 4 workshops a year. Special seasonal events at Christmas time, they do these kinds of things. They go for walks on Sabbath together. There's companionship, there's isolation we're trying to overcome. There are trips, for example, to the zoo. The Washington Zoo is a big thing there. Special projects or bags of love. Children are often included in this mourning process, so they give something special, including toys and toiletries and these kinds of things for the children that would be beneficial to them. They send out birthday cards on the anniversary of the death of a spouse. Materials for sale. They have materials for sale on their website. You look up heartlifters.org and you'll find their organization. They have logos, they have hats, they have t-shirts, again, trying to bring a knowledge of the support system that they have there. Another organization is found in Berrien Springs, Michigan, the home of Andrews University, but it's a group of churches that have come together to bring support. There was a lady from that area, I don't know if she's with us today, but a lady by the name of Brenda Keese. Her husband is was one of the professors at the seminary, and he died, and now she is taking on this responsibility of coordinating, and they call their organization Caring Hearts. The members are teamed up with someone who has lost a spouse. So someone who has lost a spouse, there's part of their team will join with that person. Of course, men with men and women with women, and they become close and they help them work through this. The group meets once a month to pray for the bereaved. During the holidays, they share special notes of support, even sending sometimes music CDs. What they're trying to do is to create this ongoing awareness that they have a support team that understands the feeling of having a loss of a loved one. At times they share flowers. In spring, a packet of forget-me-not flower seeds are sent, which I thought was kind of clever. At 1 year, bouquets of flowers and are given to women and men and given Mike. So I'm back up on that. At the 1 year mark, bouquets of flowers are given to women. Men are given Mike Tucker's book. Some of you may know Mike Tucker, and he lost his spouse. He's a television personality, and so they give Mike's book to the men. These are all ideas that have been used. We created what I call these chapters. So we have a chapter in the Philippines. Mrs. Golfan, her husband, who was the division president, died, and she has been eagerly working with this, and she has created a ministry there. I met her husband. I visited her husband when he was in the hospital. Actually, he had come to the United States for a meeting, annual council, but never was able to attend and went straight to the hospital where he died. So those are things. Being like Jesus, Jesus told the story about the king who went back to his kingdom. What he found, he compared to sheep and goats. One group was blessed because they took care of the person. He says, I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you invited me in. I needed clothes and you clothed me. I was sick and you looked after me. I was in prison and you came to visit me. But he goes on. Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when did we see you hungry or feed you or thirsty and you gave something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in a prison and visit you? The king will reply, truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. In the Samaritan story, the good Samaritan, who was the neighbor? Anyone in need. And that is what we have to do. And so we need to pray at this time, just to close this part for a moment. Any questions on this? There may be some questions on this. I would hope that in this community, a chapter would begin with someone heading up a ministry for those who have lost a spouse. We have one ready to start in Portland, Oregon. It would be good if we could start one in this area. So please consider that. Let's pray. Father in heaven, thank you again for your loving kindness. Sadness is everywhere, but we can bring hope and courage and purpose. Please inspire us to do what we can do. And those who are in agony over the loss of a loved one, be close to them and comfort them. May your coming be soon. In Jesus' name, amen. All right? Yes?
Where can we see the rest of her story?
Okay, go to possibilityministries.org. That's our website. On the website, go under Ministries. And under Ministries, you'll see all 7 of the ministries. Go to the one for bereavement for spousal loss. Click on that. When you go there, go to the bottom of the page and it will tell you resources. And you click on the resources and it will take you to that section. When you'll see the statue like you saw here. If you have any questions, you can call me or write to me. You can write to me. I should give you my email address so you can reach me if you need some questions. Or probably the best thing is to contact Alita. She can give you my email address. I don't mind, and I'll be happy to work with you if need be. Or she or Noy can probably answer your questions as well. But I'll be happy to help any way I can.